the Public Works Committee meeting for Thursday, January 28th, 2016. I'll have a roll call.
Mr. Engelbaum?
Here.
Mr. Barris?
Here.
Mr. Bryan?
Here.
Mr. Hollins?
Here.
Mr. Gidry?
Here.
Mr. Guillory?
Here.
Mr. Hunter?
Here.
President Landry?
Here.
Mr. Latour?
Here.
Ms. Mayo? Here. Mr. McMillan? Oh, he's attending another meeting this evening. Mr. Scott?
Here.
Mrs. Trimmy? Here. Mr. White?
Here.
Chairman Farnham?
Here. Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Item 3, presentation of certificates to the members of Southwest Louisiana Empire, empowering and mentoring peers in responsibility and education. Mr. Guillory.
Thank you, and I'm going to go to the podium. Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't do
I just want to say that I was very impressed with this group, these young ladies, and everyone that's involved, that what their job is. They actually hold meetings and represent like you all, and they're going to take your place one day up there. So this is a good group, and Miss Yolanda Jackson, who's basically over the whole group, she's going to come up and tell you a little bit about some of the things, the girls and everything. Some of the things, they have to be recognized as a top 10 student, be a supporter of Volunteer Louisiana, provide a great understanding to youth concerning law enforcement. Topics of discussion at their meetings is violence, social media, youth and legal issues, volunteering, relation issues, and education. And I'm going to let Ms. Yolanda want to come up, and then we'll introduce each one of the girls. You can tell a little bit about everything, and then the girls can say something if they want to about their positions. They have a president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, and they go on down from there.
Thank you. Hi, how are you? My name is Yolanda Jackson. As he stated, these are a few of the members that were able to come into attendance today. As he stated, the name of the organization is SWLA Empire. The Empire does stand for Empowering and Mentoring Peers in Responsibility and Education. Our mission, I began this program primarily for charter schools in Southwest Louisiana. My goal is to assist not only public charter schools, but all public schools in Calcasieu Parish with promoting trust and understanding between administrators, faculty, public officials, parents, committees, and of course, the youth. Our board meets primarily once a month with either law enforcement, city and parish officials, faculty, adult mentors, parents, and students to discuss current and relative issues of mutual interest. Actually, we have a meeting that's going to be held tomorrow at the Central Library from 4 to 6 if you'd like to attend. I have some of the members who would like to say a little bit about themselves.
And their position.
And their position. Destiny Thomas, this is my daughter. She's the president of SWLA Empire. She's 15 years old. She attends Lake Charles College Prep, as you see there, and she's in the 9th grade. Destiny.
On you, Destiny. Don't be
Hello,
nervous.
everybody. My name is Destiny Thomas.
Hello.
In the next 4 years, I plan to get a job, do more volunteer work because I just like helping people out. Plan to bring my grades up all the way through high school to graduation and through college. After I graduate high school, I plan on going to one of the 2 colleges, Grambling State University or Northwestern State University. That's just 2 colleges I have in mind so far. During those 4 years for the organization, I plan to increase the members of SWLA Empire, do as many fundraisers, and donate to the needy. When we graduate, the board will decide on who we will be leaving our nonprofit organization to. Someone who likes to take care of people and help them like we do, while continue doing work as a nonprofit organization and going to college. I understand that it will be a hard and stressful time, especially for the first year, but we will figure it out. or after I graduate and go to college, I plan to have a building for the organization, if possible, of course. So when the Young Empire members need us, we can meet up and look through what the plans would be to help them.
Thank you.
This is Ashanti Guillory. She is 14 years old, also a student at Lake Charles College Prep. She's the vice president of SWLA Empire. It's going to be short and sweet about her goals as well.
In the next 4 years, I plan to graduate high school. After high school, I plan on going to Columbia University or University of California. I want to major in nursing. As the vice president of SWLA Empire, I plan to help people. We plan to increase the members and make a difference in the community.
Thank you. I noticed that last name,
This is Trinity Thomas, my other daughter. She's the secretary of SWLA Empire, also a student of Lake Charles College Prep. She wants to speak a little bit about her goals as well.
Hello, everybody. I'm Trinity Thomas. I'm 14 years old, and I'm the secretary of SWLA Empire. For the next 4 years of my life, I would like to graduate high school with a 3.0 GPA. From there, I would like to continue this SWLA Empire program with my Empire group. In addition, I will be going to Southern University, where my aunt Anitra Jones and former Miss Southern University, 2004-2005, the founder of Up Till Dawn at Southern, that raises money for St. Jude and currently holds a PhD and is a fellow at the CDC. I love her. I will be getting a bachelor's degree in accounting, completing 4 to 6 years of college. Later in life, I will be continuing college and being a part of SWLA Empire, being able to experience the life of a busy woman. This is my view of my future life at 14 years old.
This is Tazzer Stevenson. I'm sorry. She's 15 years old, also a member of Lake Charles College Prep. She is terribly shy, so I'm going to read for her if I can. Again, her name is Tazzer Stevenson. What I want to do with the next 4 years of my life is to graduate high school and go to college with a basketball scholarship. She's a basketball player for the Lake Charles College Prep Trailblazers. With her scholarship, she would like to continue school to become a lawyer and earn her master's degree. SWLA Empire has opened her eyes and showed her that she can do more with her life than just achieve, more than just not achieve anything. It's for me to be proud of.
I have a couple of certificates for you all. I have one for Ms. Yolanda Jackson for starting the program and getting it going and making the young people, learn some things more than going to just school to graduate.
Thank you.
And I have one for each of the ladies. Jackie, is she here?
She's not here.
Okay. Deja?
She's not here.
Okay.
While we're receiving certificates, I did want to mention 2 very important contributors of SWLA Empire, and that's Miss Patricia Prebula with Prebula Public Relations. Awesome woman. She's been a great asset to SWLA Empire. Also to Miss Hazel Logan, who is here today. She's a business and youth mentor. She's a CPR instructor and motivational speaker, and she's the newest contributor to SWLA Empire.
Thank you. Trinity?
Trinity.
Okay. Now, this one is in training for my seat, Ashante Guillory. That's my granddaughter. She hates when I do that. Okay, Destiny. I want to thank these young ladies. Give them a hand, y'all, for all they do. Want to take one group picture? Okay. You want to come up?
One more.
Come on.
Always one. Here we go. Two more. One more.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank
you all
Keep up
for
the
being
good work,
here.
ladies. Keep up the good work.
Move to item 4, receive report and recommendations from staff regarding parish-wide drainage study initiatives and take appropriate action thereon. Mr. Bean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take a moment to go over your last action back in September 2015, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. John Snow in a few minutes with Emergent Method, who's going to have the bulk of the presentation, and then Alan and I at the end will wrap it up. But let me go ahead and catch everybody up. The slide that is up now is actually from last September, so I'll just quickly refresh everybody about what the police jury has already authorized us to do, which put us in the phase we're in today. The first bullet, develop an organizational structure and budget for stormwater and watershed management. Alan has primarily been working on that, and what we have done with the 2016 budget is actually put funds in there. You have approved that budget to begin what, in essence, is a drainage section within Public Works. We haven't had that before, and we have to actually build the actual department, if you will, or section, and the budget money is there, however. So that's actually partially completed. It's going to have to be carried out over the course of 2016, and that is also the same with the second bullet, which is identify specific funding mechanisms for this department, as well as capital project needs. And what we've done there, the budget funding that we're actually utilizing, it's your existing funds through what is called the Road and Drainage Property Tax. That is a 4.06 mil tax. In 2016, the revenues from that tax were approximately $7.7 million. For this year's budget, I believe $2 million of that total is actually budgeted for startup for this drainage department. Now, what we've done, because it's not new funding, we're utilizing an existing tax. Historically, though, after you take the Road and Drainage Trust Fund $1 million off the top, which matches drainage district and city funds for drainage projects, the leftover has strictly gone to roads. But in the last few years, the need has been stronger for drainage. So there's other road sources of funding, which is great. Drainage, unfortunately, really doesn't have it. So that's why we're actually shifting an existing tax more to the drainage side than roads. But we fully understand that roads are critical, so they are not going to be negatively impacted by that. So not only for that department, but the goal is to actually do something similar to what we do with the road program. Tim each year puts together what he calls the CIP, Capital Improvement Program. And our goal is to work with drainage districts and the cities and our own parish needs and come up with a 3-year revolving program of capital projects for drainage utilizing this same tax. That amount will vary over the years, and obviously it's going to take a lot of funding for that, but we feel like that will get us off to a really good start. The third bullet is you had approved for us to begin development of low-impact development standards and floodplain preservation policies. Alan and his staff, along with technical consultants, Fenstermaker, have been doing that, and that is what led us to the last phase, which is the last item on that slide. Once we had enough there to present to the public and stakeholders, the main purpose after that was to do what we call public engagement. And this is really critical because any initiative that you undertake of this significance, you want obviously good public input. This is a bit new for us on this level of input, but we feel it's critical because people, just to philosophize a little, if we don't reach out more, and this is any local government across the country, the apathy builds or animosity, and they don't connect what their local government is doing with a lot of good things, and so they can be distant. So we're very pleased with the outcome over the past couple of months in these meetings, which you'll learn about. So that's, once we got the go-ahead in September, that's where we are tonight. And so at this time, I'll go ahead and introduce John Snow. John is with Emergent Method. They have been working with us. They're out of Baton Rouge. They've done a lot of good work. They specialize in public engagement, strategic planning, and other things. And they have been a great partner in this effort. And what John is going to do is summarize this process that's undergone the last couple of months. And when he's complete, we'll have any questions or comments from you. And then Alan and I will end with some recommendations about where we're going forward. Before John gets started, just as a reminder, this is a nice little brochure we put together. We're following your mission, principles, and objectives for this process. And we're sticking with that plan, and we're on a good schedule as we had hoped at the time we presented this. So at this time, thank you, John, for coming, and I'll turn it over to him, and you probably need this.
Thank you, Brian, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's really a pleasure to be with you today and to talk through sort of the efforts that we've been undergoing over the course of the last several months. As Brian mentioned, the name of our firm is Emergent Method. We're based in Baton Rouge. We have several folks on our team who actually are from the Calcasieu area, which has been really helpful as we've been getting up to speed on the issues that we're talking about here today. A lot of our work is really in the space that Brian described, this public engagement space, really grappling and trying to understand these big, complex infrastructure initiatives that can be really challenging to wrap your head around, and even more challenging to figure out how you can take really quality, sound science and adapt it and implement it in a way that fits the needs of a unique community. We work all up and down the coast here in Louisiana, Baton Rouge, here in Lake Charles and Calcasieu Parish, and elsewhere. And so we were very pleased to be a part of this. It really opened our eyes to the issues that residents and folks here face on a regular basis and have for the last several years. You see the slide up here that says, "Why are we here today?" That's the slide that we have opened up with every meeting that we've had. And it's really important to couch in terms of what the conversation is about that we're trying to solve. And I'll use the word we a lot. And when I say we, we've really kind of ingratiated ourselves into the team that's been working on this. And I do want to commend the team that's been working on this, and Brian and Alan and everybody on the team. I mean, you have a great group here that's passionate about affecting change in a very positive way. And I can't speak more highly. We do a lot of work with a lot of agencies like yours, and you have a very good team in place that's very dedicated to the mission of what you guys are trying to do. As far as what we were attempting to do, we know that growth has been experienced here in this region, and it's only expected to continue. And at this point, we really cannot afford to wait any longer to make generational decisions around policies that will put us on a path forward for sustainability. At the end of the day, that was what this effort was about, to ensure that we had the correct policy framework in place that could help propel this community forward for many years to come. I want to show this map. It's something that we showed at the open house public meetings that we had. And this is of the Calcasieu Parish stormwater system. We feel it's really great because the truth of the matter is that regardless of whether you're in a city or in an unincorporated area of the parish, wherever you may be, you can see how water runs through the parish and how it impacts all of the various communities within the parish. And there's an old adage that says water knows no boundaries, and it couldn't be clearer in this diagram. And that's really what we wanted to lead off all of our discussions with, is that at the end of the day, it's about mitigating flooding. and reducing flooding in the parish. And so our approach to a policy framework has been rooted in that philosophy. As far as our process is concerned, we went to a number of different folks who represent all different groups that could potentially be impacted or involved in the development of new drainage policies for the parish. And so we met with municipalities, gravity drainage districts, engineers, planners, landowners in the parish, developers, realtors, Go Group task forces and subcommittees. The Go Group, as Brian alluded to, has been very involved and instrumental in this process and helping to inform the outreach and engagement. The task forces and subcommittees we met with provided us with very helpful insights about how we needed to adapt what we were thinking in terms of conceptual solutions around policy and present them in a way that would be meaningful and understandable in a general public setting. And then business and industry as well. In the public open houses, we held 3. We held one in Lake Charles, one in Sulphur, and one in Moss Bluff over the course of a 3-day stretch a couple of weeks ago. As you can see with the different groups that we engaged with and the public meetings, they were extremely well attended. And this is obviously an issue that people are very passionate about. There's nothing that's more impactful to someone than someone who has experienced the devastation that flooding can cause. And people are looking for solutions, and they're welcoming them. And so, as you can see, the number of people that have had input in this process is a lot, and it's been very helpful to informing where we've come from and where we're headed from here. Real quick to talk about the stakeholder focus groups. I mentioned they were well attended. We had over 100+ people who participated in these discussions. These are just some pictures that we had from those conversations. These were very informal meetings as we were trying to talk through concepts. This is what we're thinking, general feedback. Are we on the right track? As far as the key takeaways were concerned, we had about 5 that really, across all these conversations, continue to bubble up. As we move forward, and I'm not going to go exhaustively through these, but I will touch on each one. As we move forward, we do aim to get back together with these groups and the folks that we've talked to as we're developing draft policies and a draft policy framework to ensure that we're headed down the right path. Again, we wanted to talk to them early on to ensure that we had their input as we're going down this path, and then as we get further along, we want to make sure that they still have a seat at that table. Continuing to be reactive in terms of the relationship between growth and drainage policies, guiding that growth is expensive and impractical. It goes back to many of the comments around, I wish we had done this 10, 20, 30 years ago. We told a story in some of these meetings around how in many communities, you're not the only one that is saying, man, I wish I had done this 20, 30 years ago. In Baton Rouge with traffic, everyone knows about traffic in Baton Rouge. There's a program that's a capital improvements program that's in place that is $600 to $700 million in value. It is there to provide patchwork short-term solutions because of the lack of a road bond program since the 1960s. You can see what happens when you neglect to address things in a holistic, systemic way, which is what we're attempting to do right here. Capital projects must be prioritized to address residents' and businesses' immediate needs and to deal with existing infrastructure. That was a theme that rang true in the public meetings as well, and from the feedback that we heard from the general public, is that the policy front you're going down is great conceptually. We think it's the right idea. We're supportive of what you're doing. You cannot look at it in a vacuum or in a silo. These policy initiatives have got to be undertaken with a real pragmatic approach to how we go about doing projects that can provide short-term relief in conjunction with this long-term vision for reduced flooding. Not all regulations are bad regulations. As I mentioned, we had members of the development community, major landowners in the parish, engineers who were involved in these conversations, and that was a refreshing key takeaway for us, is to know that these may be people who may have to do things a little bit differently as we move forward once we know what those policies are, but it wasn't an objection to that. It was a resounding, we know that things need to be done differently. If we don't do that now, then who will? We're just going to kick the can down the road, and that to us is unacceptable. And then above all, we need to work together with a common mission. There's a lot of folks at the table when it comes to managing drainage and drainage infrastructure in this parish, whether it's the parish, the municipalities and cities, the gravity drainage districts. And the resounding theme was that everyone needs to work together in order for this to be successful. It cannot be just a parish initiative in a vacuum. Everyone has got to work together and undertake this same vision towards sustainable drainage and drainage infrastructure in our parish. So the public open houses, we had a tremendous turnout at each one of these, which, again, it goes to show the level of impact that flooding has had on residents. People generally come out to public meetings because they have a problem. And we heard a number of stories at these meetings that they're heart-wrenching. You hear about people's issues with flooding. You hear about things that are recurring. You hear stories about people who have lived in their homes for many years, and for the longest time, they never had issues with flooding. And now, in the last probably 5 to 10 years, they're starting to have issues with flooding. And you look at what has happened over the last 5 to 10 years in the parish with all the tremendous growth that we've had, and it's easy to connect the dots even outside of the science that points to it and how runoff is informing a greater flooding situation. As you'll see here on these pictures, if you didn't have a chance to come to one of the meetings, we had a presentation, and then we broke off into open house segments where we had a very large team of parish staff that was designed intentionally. We wanted to hear one-on-one from residents what their problems were so that we could document them and respond to them. And in total, we ended up receiving over 80 formal public comments that were provided to us in this particular phase of the initiative. And to the extent we've been able to respond to them, email them back, talk to them in person at the public meetings, we've been doing so. And I want to thank everyone who took the time to provide us with a public comment. It takes time to write down and articulate your thoughts in a way that you feel adequately describes your situation. And every single one of those comments is read by our team and absorbed. And so, when you see some of these key takeaways, these are quotes from folks who provided their comments, but they very much are consistent with what we heard in terms of those key themes. We appreciate long-term plans. Citizens like us have immediate flooding problems, which are not being addressed with ditch maintenance for now. A proactive approach is what's needed. Looking years ahead, we also need to maintain what we have. That goes back to the whole coupling policy initiatives, which are great, but has to be done in conjunction with capital projects. Drainage policies must be consistent between the parish and municipalities, otherwise drainage issues will not be resolved. Again, it echoes some of what we heard in our stakeholder conversations, which was we have got to work together on this. As a resident, even I know that it's not something that just the parish can do on its own. It's going to require us all to work together and all to have a willingness to change how we grow in this parish. And this last one, it's short, but I feel like it is very representative of the comments that we have. And I will say, an unintended result of this process, we wanted to get input on the policies that we were considering as conceptual solutions. We had a tremendous amount of input that, while it was not related to policy, it was very much related to individual needs. Brian talked about capital improvements and projects and prioritizing projects moving forward. We received a tremendous amount of data and input and stories that will absolutely feed into those conversations. And as we move forward and as we begin thinking through how to prioritize and how to move this program forward, that feedback, while it does not relate specifically to the policies itself, it's very, very valuable in terms of looking at this as a comprehensive solution. We've lived at this address since 1971. Drainage has deteriorated. We've been asking for improvements for many years. I wanted to show this to you. This is, and we'll zoom in a second, but I wanted to show this map to you. This was one of the stations that we had set up at the open houses. And what we did was we asked residents to point to where their home or their business was on the map and identify the severity of flooding that had occurred there. And so the red is most severe, yellow, and green. And green is the least severe. And as you can see, and I'll zoom in a second, here's the Lake Charles and Sulphur open house mapping and how it's scattered throughout. You can see the outline of the river, how it's scattered throughout those particular areas. Again, we know exactly where these addresses are. We've run them through GIS, the GIS software at the parish, and we're going to be incorporating these into our conversations, even external to just the policy changes, as part of that overall comprehensive solution. And this is these are the results that we had from the Moss Bluff open house mapping exercise. I want to end on this before I turn it back over to Alan. this is a problem that I think everyone can agree is a problem. And we started out a lot of our conversations early on. Can we agree on the fact that this is a problem? And it seems like a silly question to ask, but until you have consensus on a problem, you can't work towards getting consensus on a solution. And by going at it from that perspective, coming at it with initial concepts on policies, rough concepts that we think are working in other communities and we think will work here, it's great science. It's sound science. It's what other communities are doing, but not every other community and no community is like Calcasieu Parish. It's very unique. So how can we take these sound science principles and apply them to this community? That's the part where you balance it with public input. We received a lot of input. We're still going through it. I wanted to provide y'all with the high points of what we've heard, and we're looking forward to moving forward with all of that public input in hand as we continue this conversation. So with that, I want to thank you again for your time, your input, and your involvement as we've gone through this process. The input and the involvement of the jurors has been incredibly helpful and well received. Again, it shows that you care just as much as the folks that you represent. So thank you all.
Before you leave the podium, we may have some comments from some of the jurors. Mr. Hunter.
Sure.
Actually, Mr. Wainwright can speak first.
Okay.
I'll hold my comments.
Okay. Anybody else?
If y'all don't mind, we know you'll have some comments or questions, and Alan's going to go through this slide, and I think I have one more, and we'll be done very quickly. You want me to go with that one?
I think it would be better just, I mean,
I
maybe
think we
out
got
of
the
order.
slides a little out of order, but it's okay. No, missing. There it is. Okay. We're going to go ahead and just go through the recommendations, which are fairly straightforward, and then Alan's going to go into a little more detail about one of them. The first one, what we're asking you as the committee tonight to recommend the full jury for approval next week is to first authorize us to start the process of formally working with the drainage districts and cities to begin developing this capital project listing we keep talking about. Again, this one's a little easier if you were to think of how Tim builds a road program in unincorporated areas. It's just the parish. Well, this is parish entity, 7 drainage districts, and 6 municipalities. But as John pointed out on that map that showed all the drainage laterals, it's one drainage system. But we need to prioritize that. But that would be critical to begin that. And how we work with them, what is the criteria, how do you build that, how do you prioritize, those are questions to answer. But we believe we can accomplish that to where the 2017 budget would start that process. And I know it's January, and that seems like a long way off, but it will take that much time to get that going. The second one is to develop a draft of standards for addressing runoff and flood zone management parish-wide. Again, meaning inside and outside of cities. And review those standards with stakeholder groups. I think John explained it well. We basically would go from this evening and in the very near future, put together some information, mainly from Alan and the technical staff, bring those same groups back that we met with in December primarily, and get their input on what will work here in Calcasieu. Some of these new type approaches will work here, some won't, and we need to hear from our locals on that. To give you a little bit better idea than just saying standards, this is I'm going to hand it back to Alan, and he's going to explain the tiered approach we think would work well here.
Thank you, Brian. So I think most of you maybe have already seen this sample tiered approach. And just to quickly describe it, the goal, of course, as we've gone through the process, we've surely feel like we have identified the problem and runoff, and we've gotten down to the root cause as being the 5 variables that we've described that relate to runoff. And we've pointed to the solutions that we need to manage all those variables better, manage them on a watershed basis wide. So how do you get all that into policy becomes a pretty good challenge. So the best examples we can find are these tier layouts, and this is just one example. If I know it's a little hard to read the text, but if you were to look at this particular one quickly, on the left side, it works down from a type of project based on size. Starts at 2,500 square foot and really just works its way down to much bigger projects up to 23,000 square foot roughly. It doesn't really get into the type of project too much. It's just based on square footages in this particular one. Then on the right-hand side, they've related the various standards that would apply to that size development, that as you developed your project, as you did your engineering, as you did the front-end work, the things that you would have to accomplish, and then the results. So I've taken a version like this particular one, and we've sort of tried to begin the process of tailor-making it for Calcasieu Parish, because we are a little different. So just quick kind of where we believe we're going to start. We think we would start with the development size. It'd be a size-related one. I think we will have a size small enough where you're basically exempt. So that'll be, maybe less than 500 square foot or something. So there's a point where there's diminishing returns on the small end. And I think the next thing for us, as you step across a tiered chart like this, would be watershed condition, because we are a large parish, and our watersheds vary quite a bit in their current, situation. Contraband Bayou, we highlighted in our presentation, is in severe conditions. It's well built out, got a lot of flooding, this, that, and the next. Move much further away where there's a lot less construction and growth going on in a particular watershed, and you're going to find much more rural settings. So we need to branch off to where we can compensate in what levels of requirements based on the type of watershed condition. And then I think we would attempt to, because so much of our code is related to the type of development already, so much of everything we do. And what I've sort of seen out there is residential, pure, what we call residential, just mom and pop at their home. We really need to kind of get that off into a category of a separate category. So we'll call residential, sort of the single family home kind of residential, not the residential, the developer building a subdivision, but residential maybe having a path versus pretty much all the other new development, bigger developments, things being built to sell or this, that, next. Then it would move into the watershed standards itself for each, as you worked your way through a tier like this, and you would really apply to the 5 variables we've talked about so many times. We would apply a certain set of standards for each one of these lakes. So you kind of got to imagine a tree that just keeps branching off to where you end up at what your requirements are based on your type of development as you work through a tier. So where we stand today is we know once we get to that sort of right-hand side that low impact requirements is what we would be wanting to apply to a certain kind of development. We know that that's going to mean a lot less runoff, a lot more controlling of the volume of water that's going to come off your site. So, but that's where when Brian refers to the next set of meetings that we need to have is to present to the gravity drainage districts, to the developers, to the builders, actual numbers, and so they can really begin to wrap their head around what it means to try and control these flows and have some good discussion and find out where we're going to right size it. So that's what we'll be working on, which for me, in terms of the tier plan, is the actual low impact development requirement for specific development and how you get to that. So it's one thing to require a result. It's another thing to say, well, how can you get there? And so we'll be working through those two things in those coming months. And I think in the last slide, if it looks like we would be back here spring 2016 with this tier fully, sort of built out and ready to be reviewed by this committee or the full jury to be adopted, and hopefully have gone through enough of a process where everybody's fairly satisfied with the goals and the standards being set and how we're going to get to those, how we're going to ask new development to get to those, realizing that we won't be able to make everyone happy, but we got to keep our mission intact, realizing that the real goal here is to stop some flooding, especially for that long term, not making it worse. So with that, then the final, we would see, just kind of finishing out this last slide, is after you would get this package back, we would have to write ordinances that implement this tier. Sort of the legal writing that would basically implement it. That wouldn't be that much to do, but it is another step. And then you would ultimately adopt those ordinances somewhere in hopefully the summer, and then we would be more or less in line to apply that to new development going forward, depending on when you decide to actually start them. So with that, I think we're at the very end, and I think we're all here to answer your questions, and if you have any.
Thanks for that presentation. We do have some comments and questions. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions first. Mr. Beam, the road and drainage tax, what is the percentage breakup on what we spend on roads versus drainage?
Probably, well, out of the 7 or so million, 6 million-ish goes to roads.
Mm-hmm.
Then the 1 million out of the Road and Drainage Trust Fund, we looked at several years, and actually about 60% of that, so about 600,000, goes to drainage on average in a year. But the vast majority goes to roads. So.
And is that designated by statute, or is that just what we choose internally?
It is what you are allowed to do under the election call for that tax, and it's broad, which is good. You have full flexibility. Well, the Road and Drainage Trust Fund is in the tax call, so you have to keep that. Now,
Right.
you can change the parameters, but you have total flexibility to use it for roads or drainage to your needs.
Okay. And Mr. Wainwright, the new regulations that are a possibility, we only have the ability to enforce those in the unincorporated areas. Is that correct?
Well, you have the ability to through our, through our permitting processes and internal to the parish operations. You have the ability to enforce all new development that happens in the unincorporated area through our own permitting processes. So we can surely do that. But then you have a responsibility and an authority down through gravity drainage districts that we can work down through that channel, I think, to have these policies work inside incorporated areas if necessary. But I think the key thing there is, so far, all the municipalities have shown an interest in this, and I don't know that we would, I think they're going to be right there wanting to see this same stuff and tailor-make one to their environment just a little bit, because they do have a little bit different environment than us in general. So I think it would shift slightly maybe some of the parameters. But if they were to adopt something similar, then we wouldn't be in a position of necessarily needing to enforce it through a gravity drainage district. But at the end of the day, I think it's possible, because you do have the authority over the gravity drainage districts in the way that it works, that we could require discharges into laterals to be controlled, and if whoever's discharging. So I think that's a long way around, but you have that authority.
But certainly we do, we want the cities cooperating.
Yes, sir, absolutely. I think they want to.
Good, good. Well, we still have a lot of undeveloped land in Calcasieu Parish, but it won't be that way for long. And the example of Baton Rouge and traffic, I think, is a great example of 10, 15 years from now, what we may be experiencing in Calcasieu Parish with drainage if we don't do anything. If we don't do anything in 10 years, the problem will be 10 times worse, and the solutions will probably be 10 times more expensive. So I firmly believe the time to act is now. We do have immediate needs. People are suffering every time it rains, and I'm hoping with the coupling of capital improvement projects and a generational change in the way we oversee development in Calcasieu Parish, 10 or 15 years from now, people will look back and say, thank God they did something. And so I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question may be ahead of where we are, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In developing these ordinances and these changes, you know, you talked about different watersheds having different issues. The ones that are less developed, you know, obviously doesn't have the problems that Country Bend Bayou does. With that said, I would think that you would develop in the Country Bend watershed in such a way you would require, you know, we've talked about in the past, I'm not sure of the exact term, but it's where they would have, you can have a zero effect or that number can go negative, where it's actually better off than it was when it was undeveloped. And I would think, and I certainly hope that you would go in that direction. In that watershed, that number should be negative, because we have to try to make up for, I guess, a lack of a better word, the sins of the past to try to correct that problem, whereas in a more undeveloped area, that number probably could be zero, and in the future we'll probably be okay. I mean, is that safe to assume all of that, or?
That is exactly how I think a lot of it has to work, Mr. Landry. I mean, the reason why one of the first tiers is going to be what type condition your watershed is that you are in. Because it is going to vary. It can be 0 to 10, from bad to worse. It can be impaired to unimpaired. And again, it can be any one of those 5 variables that we've kind of talked about can be the major problem in that watershed. So we have to have flexibility to target the problem. You go to the most impaired watersheds to the degree that they're flooding the most, if we're calling flooding impairment. Yeah, I think you have to look at the possibility of creating policy where if you develop versus your site rather than having just a net 0 runoff, that it is very common around the country. You're seeing places where it's a net negative 25%. So you have this way of kind of rebuilding your capacity. And the reason why you have to do that, why it has to go to that extreme, is because you just simply cannot afford to build enough capital improvement to build your way out of a problem like that. So you have to manage the rest of your watershed as best you can. You have to take those drastic measures. Obviously, our most urbanized watersheds are around our municipalities, our big municipalities now, so it's going to be really critical. And it's going to be a part of the conversation with those municipalities of how far can we go. And I think that has to be in the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Anderpont.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we have a Blue Ribbon Committee in place that y'all are working closely with. Have we incorporated the gravity drainage boards in this process? Okay. The other thing, you keep mentioning the municipalities, the incorporated areas. I don't know how we're going to make this work if we don't get them on board. They're going to have to be, because, you know, everybody says, you know, water doesn't know the ward lines or doesn't know where, you know, it's not going to stop. My main concern was the gravity drainage board, because obviously they know where the major problems exist in each one of their districts, and without them being on board and closely, what's the word I'm looking for, get them involved where we can lean on them for their expertise in this field. And I realize we got a serious drainage problem in Calcasieu Parish, and all of them are different, but my main concern was to be sure that the gravity drainage boards were on board with this project, and so that we can tackle the whole problem. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond?
Go ahead.
Mr. Anderson, that's an excellent point, and to address that, the first group we met with, as soon as we covered this internally with all of you, was the drainage districts and the municipalities in the same meeting. And the reason is because of what you said. All 3 entities, the parish, the districts, the cities, have some piece of the responsibility. And together, without all of those, we're really, you know, going uphill. So everything we do is with that in mind, or it won't work. And so they're the first ones, and we'll go back to them very soon here, because they know those laterals better than anybody else.
Well, may I follow up? What is the mentality of the municipalities? Do they feel favorable? I mean, are they?
I will give you my opinion, and I think the team shares it, including Emergent Method, is we heard, thank you for doing this and leading. Somebody has to take the lead. And it's natural that you would as the parish entity because you represent everyone. And certainly each one has a different set of circumstances, but I feel like a strong support for the direction we're trying to go. Now, you know, the devil's in the details, depends on the standards, but those are things we work through. But anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they all think this is a good thing.
Well, not to cut you off, but they need to be, you know. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Yeah, just a couple questions. I'll try to stay away from too many water analogies along the way, but let's go back to what you first talked about, the road and drainage tax. When you talk about shifting some to more towards drainage, do you already have a sense of what you're talking about when you're saying shift some of that money over towards drainage, or is it just going to be fluid from year to year?
Well, that's a good question. The way we've approached it is you phase into it. So, for example, this year, I believe, Alan, is it $2 million?
Yeah, roughly.
$2 million of the $7.7 million expected revenue we shifted to drainage. As we build a department, that's sufficient, but when we get into having to do capital projects, either totally or with matching funds from districts or cities, we envision stepping that up and at some point plateauing. I mean, we don't say it's going to all go to drainage, and we have to work very closely with Mr. Connor to make sure that doesn't hurt. So it'd be a phased-in approach, but we do think it would be higher as over the next few years. Yes.
All right. When we go back to the watersheds, referring back to what Mr. Landry is talking about, we're talking about these different tiers and how we want to be able to look at them each a certain way. I would just hope as we look at some of the watersheds that are a little less impacted right now that we don't water down our ordinance so much or make it so easy to appease that in the future it washes out because now we're going to have to go back and change it. So I hope we don't make it too easy, you know, just because there's no development in there right now. So if you want to respond back to that, or you have...
Well, I would, if you don't mind. I agree with you. We kind of, you know, in 2007, we passed a set of ordinances that maybe, you know, were too easy, but it was in the perspective that we had at that time because of the amount of growth and development we had. But I think Mr. Landry makes a valid point. There's only so many ways that you can recover some of these watersheds that are further along. So when we say it's going to be less standards, I think our minimum standard, regardless of where you're at, is going to be pretty close to zero runoff, new runoff, you know, so that we hold that line. And then for the most impaired, we'll do a little more. So not to say that we won't have some, you know, again, the single-family residential may be a lot different in a much rural area than say, in the middle of a more impaired watershed. So I think where you're going to see the breaks, and I think we need to be a little bit mindful of is that, especially at the single-family home that's already there and they're just doing an addition and, you know, or adding a carport or a shop, that's where we need to, especially out in the less impaired watersheds, to allow some of that to continue. And we got time in those watersheds. Remember, we have time in those watersheds for two reasons. Capital improvement in those watersheds can happen as well. We won't just be focusing on new ditches and laterals in the most impaired, because right now, like a good road, right now is the best time to get some good laterals and wide open right-of-ways and things like that, whatever we're going to have in those more rural watersheds while they're not so developed, while you can. So the combined effect of both things working together, hopefully we can make those resources stretch out as far as possible into the future, and we can recover some of the sins of the past and the ones that need it most urgently.
All right. Now, when we're looking at the tiers that you showed us, in tier one, the first, you just said 2,500 square foot. These are just preliminary. That's not a number even discussing right now. You just threw some numbers in there to kind of give us reading material.
Yeah, at this point, I'd just say small, medium, and large would be probably a little too far into the details. But in places, just to give you a frame of reference, they generally begin at 500 to 2,000 square foot being the small, 2,000 to say 20,000 being that medium range, and above that in acreage being large. So you can see large is going to cover the vast majority of new development. I mean, everything that's really being developed, so sort of an acre's, say, 43,000 square feet. So, you know, the bulk of your ordinance would cover most development, but you leave room for the smallest of things.
So will it kind of line up with some of our existing ordinances? Like right now, you can't build an accessory building above 2,000 square foot without coming in for a variance or an exception. So is it going to kind of ride along some of what we have, or is it going to just, I mean, we want to try to keep it as simple as possible, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, you're doing a good job of explaining why there's two steps left. First,
Okay.
The first step is going to be establishing the how much we want, you know, kind of the what needs to be required and at what levels, and that's that next little phase, getting the tier itself built out, and we'll include that in the conversations. But then that next step is really coming back and marrying it up with your existing ordinances, just like you said, because there's so much reliant on when a permit is required. So, you know, you have to have opportunities to review the development, you know, in order to be able to enforce these things. So we'll have to marry up, and that's why Wes and his team are going to be, you know, so critical at that point of making sure that our ordinances fit as much of our current processes as we have as possible, you know.
All right. Where we start talking about municipalities and gravity, all of us working together, you know, one of the areas that we can work together where it's pretty clear, our stormwater water permit that we all carry, municipalities, the parish, it's already, the federal government has said this is what you do. This is how you enforce it. These are the laws that are out there. So I think sooner than later we should begin an educational program, whether we do it on CGov, whether we're handing out white papers when they pull in permits, whatever it is, to begin to teach people what stormwater is, what that stormwater permit that we're supposed to be doing, what it looks like, because there's some things that we can do to protect all these ditches and culverts and right-of-ways that we're not doing at this point. So we do have common ground there. So I would like to see some kind of educational system begin to start sooner than later, since we do have that on the books right now. Last thing I want to talk about is, you know, we talk about spending a lot of money, but one of the things that I'm really and want to see happen is every public meeting we have, every one of these pamphlets we put out, every time, this is all going to help our community rating system. All of this goes into our flood insurance, because that's going to help get our ratings down so our flood insurance can go down. So I want to make sure everything we're doing in this process is well documented, well put into that group, to make sure that we don't lose any pennies in this process, because they're all we're going to need every one of them. So with that, I thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman.
Just quickly on that, we have been, of course, a great amount of documentation has been done, but part of the reorganization part of in developing of the department inside here in the police jury is to be able to pull together, like I've said before, we have some staff in different areas of our operations, various operations that are doing bits and pieces of all this, but part of what will help, I believe, will help make all that work better and more efficient is when we pull those different pieces a little closer together into this section where they can all feed off of each other a little better and begin to tie it all up nice and neat in a nice little bow. We focus more uniformly or consistently across all those little bases, because it's real easy to get off and kind of forget a piece here and there or get segmented when you talk about all the things that are drainage related. And I think that's one of the things that over the long term the department will create a long-term success that it's hard to kind of put in words what I think we'll be able to accomplish at this point, but just having a core group of people working on this every day, I think will do great things.
I think even if you added the word flood to your drainage department, we'd probably get points for it. So maybe even looking at something like that. And the last thing I wanted to mention, as we talk about working together, I've been more than impressed with all the gravity drainage guys. I mean, there's a ton of them here tonight. I haven't been to a meeting yet to where gravity drainage has not been represented across the parish. So I just wanted to thank y'all for continuing to be part of this process. You know, you're in it every day, and I want to tell you thank you.
You good?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'd also like to remind anybody that's in the audience tonight that if you'd like to speak on this item, fill out one of those blue slips and turn it in, and you'll get your chance at the podium. With that, Mr. Barris.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think my question may have gotten answered, but I want to make sure I ask, and I can just lob it that away, and whoever it pertains to, just jump on it. I just want to just inquire that, you know, you said nobody knows the drainage laterals and the inner workings of their areas any better than the folks at the various gravity drainage districts. Will they remain, as they stand today, will they remain part of the process through all phases?
Could I ask you to maybe clarify that? You mean consolidation?
I'm sorry, I didn't say that word.
the C word. I'll take a shot at that, Alan. You can if you want to. If this isn't going to answer your question, just let me know, Judd, and I'll try.
3 years and some odd. So
one of the things that our approach is, this is the most important phase because the ordinances and the capital projects have such a big impact. However, the maintenance of laterals is a piece of it. And the jurors, when we started this back in 2014, were very clear. We need to look at everything in drainage, comprehensive. And I think that's exactly what you should do. To look at a part of it and not the other doesn't make sense. What comes out of that, don't know. I will tell you our current approach between now and, I guess, early summer, simultaneously working on these ordinances and developing capital project priorities will be going on. You can only do so much at once. However, hopefully by whatever point in the summer, whatever ordinances you may pass that come out of this process, at that point, we would go into the phase of looking more at the operations. And we have, as far as how that goes, it's in what you pass in the brochures, we just call it operational objectives, and it's kind of outlined in here. So and we said this from the beginning, and I know it started before your term, but we will look at those with very open mind, and we'll cover, you know, what our plans are before we embark on that with all of you to say, okay, here's what we're doing and why. Let me say that everything we would do would be exactly what we do for all of our departments all the time. And there's a lot of things internally to the parish we have been looking at. And I don't know if that helps at all, but that's our approach. We aren't looking at the operational structure over the next few months, but it's something we will take up at that time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? We need a motion.
Oh, go ahead.
To receive report.
And and we need to ask if you can say approve recommendations.
Move to receive report and accept recommendations.
Thank you. Even better.
So we have a motion and a second to receive report with accepting the recommendations of the report. And we have any discussion on those items? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion will carry.
Farnham, can I just make a comment? I forgot earlier. First, I wanted to thank all of the jurors. We had great attendance by the police jurors at these public meetings, and it meant a lot to the people. They commented on that. It shows you care, and we just, from the staff, it means a lot. And I want to thank our staff team. I can't name them all, there's a lot, but we got a lot of help from Karen Clapp with the GO Group on this public input phase. She did a ton of work working with Emergent Method, and I just want to thank her for that. And it was a very beneficial process for all of us. So thank all of you.
I would like to comment on that as well. I attended all the meetings, and I know y'all met some pretty pointed questions in a lot of cases, and y'all handled it very well. And I think the public was pleased with the presentation in general. So thank y'all for your effort. With that, we'll move to item 5. Consideration of making a recommendation with
Move to
reference to
adopt.
adopting a
Second.
resolution approving an agreement for expropriation of property for the Tank Forward Road Project Site Distance Project in Ward 3. We have a motion by Mr. Brame, second by Mr. Scott. Any discussion on that item? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion will carry. Item 6, consideration of making a
Move to approve
recommendation with
recommendation.
reference to adopting
Second.
a resolution approving an active donation for the Pine Cone Drive Extension Project in Ward 1. We have a motion by Mr. White and a second by Ms. Trimming. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion will carry. Item 7, consideration of making a recommendation with reference to authorizing the parish engineer to
Move on
advertise for
seven.
Calcasieu Parish project number
Second.
2016-06, South Old Highway 90 Bridge Replacement. Motion by Mr. Barris, second by Mr. Anderpont. Discussion. Any objection? That motion will carry. Number 8, any other matters for consideration?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned.
I just left out mine came up. I didn't know.
Spoke to you soon, didn't you?
You leaving?
The purpose of today's committee meeting is to formulate an agenda for the regular meeting of the police jury on February 4th, 2016. The chair will entertain a motion and a second to pull number 17.
Second.
Motion and a second. Pull number 17. We shall move forward.
I got all but one. You got the other one.
Take appropriate action on the terms of the following members of various board districts and further adopt resolutions approving appointments and reappointments.
Move to reappoint Mr. Monty Hurley for the Creo Nature Trail.
We're not yet there yet.
Oh, we're not there?
We're all in a hurry too, though.
I'm in a hurry.
You want to run this meeting?
No, I don't even want to sit up there close to you.
A, Mrs. Anvick, Children and Youth Planning Board.
I miss
So moved.
Andy.
Move to reappoint. Move to appoint.
Move to appoint Ms. Stephanie Kragowski.
All right. Is there any opposition? Motion carries.
In there.
There you go.
Mr. Monty Hurley, Creole Nature Trail, Scenic Byway.
Move to reappoint.
Second.
Mr. Paul Gilry, Creole Nature Trail, Scenic
Move to
Byway.
reappoint.
Second.
Have motion and a second to reappoint. Mr. Brian Corbello,
Move to
Waterworks District
reappoint.
Number 14 of Ward 5. Mrs. Trimmy,
Second.
I have a motion and a second to reappoint. Any opposition? Mr. Lucas Terracini, Airport
Move to
District
reappoint.
Number 1.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to reappoint. Any opposition? Mr. Tony Stelly, Burton Coliseum Advisory Council.
Delay for 30 days.
Second.
Defer for 30 days.
Defer for 30 days.
Do we have a second?
Yes.
I do.
Okay, we have motion and a second to defer for 30 days. Any opposition? That motion carries. Is there any other business to come before this committee at this
Move
time?
to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. We stand adjourned.